Do you have any questions with regards to last session yesterday?
No, I haven't.
All right, okay, that's fine. So today let's crack on with the last unit that we're looking at covering, and this is more so related to understanding how the travel, tourism, and hospitality sector in particular is actually shaping up. We get to learn a bit about the history and the historical developments in this particular unit, and then it basically talks about, I think again, what OTHM has done is they've merged and mixed and matched and merged a lot of things that they try to bring into the qualifications, and sometimes it becomes difficult to do justice when you look at the indicative content and some of the tasks. But I think the unit which I've gone through currently focuses on understanding, the key areas in terms of how the sector is developing. It also looks at understanding into taking a bit of a peep into the future to understand what are the factors which could affect the tourism hospitality industry in general. And then the later parts of the LOs actually focus on something called destination management, which normally is an additional unit in most universities. And this is, I think that what they've done is they've basically included this as the last LO. So what we're going to look at is, by the time we kind of come across to the learning outcome 4, there are 2 or 3 detailed presentations which I'll upload on Moodle today. And it will be good if you proactively, guys, go through the presentation, because this itself is a full unit, and this kind of focuses on understanding how, basically hoteliers and, people who work within this industry end up developing, cities, locations, as specifically towards, as a destination for tourism. And then the learning outcome 3 actually focuses on understanding what are the other key players which work within this sector, support this sector, and we typically tend to use a term called the ancillary industries, or the key players which are like suppliers, the key players which typically will help support this industry in terms of its growth. Is what we will look at understanding in the learning outcome 3. So here the idea would be to try and see if we pick up a hotel, if we go vertically and horizontally, what are the other sectors, or what are the other services areas which the hotel gets affected with, or works very closely with, in order to provide these services in terms of quality of the quality of care which is required, or the customer service which is required, and those kind of things is what we will understand in terms of major functions, of partner suppliers which work with this industry. The overall aim of this unit is primarily, I think I'm a bit confused myself, but I think the best way to describe is this unit, I think, should have been either termed as, planning and development for tourism, because this kind of the subject and the topics which they've covered in this particular unit actually relate to tourism planning and development. So in general, if I have to define what they've tried to do is, and the way we will study this unit is, first LO will be looking at history of tourism, which actually should have been somewhere in unit 1 rather than unit 6. Then we look at understanding a bit of bit of factors, which a bit of technological, social, and economic factors, how they affect this particular industry. And then towards the end, we understand in learning outcome 1, what are the contemporary factors. That means the ongoing issues or ongoing factors which continuously managers, people, or employees within this sector actually work or grapple with to kind of with on a daily basis, and then try and still provide the best customer service so that they are able to build loyalty and bring back customers to the same destination, same location, for the purposes of travel, leisure, and other activities. Now, contemporary issues, I would kind of like to kind of initially say here and warn that we have, when we look at contemporary issues in tourism and hospitality management, this also is a separate unit. And we have a book on this, and this itself is a separate unit which most universities actually end up ask you to, this is one of the optional units actually which you can pick up to study. If you're looking at specializing in, say, for example, the contemporary issues, involved, and how contemporary tourism in general, not the issues, but how contemporary tourism is evolving. So this concept then relates into something called ecotourism or e-tourism, and there are various connotations of, how contemporary tourism is coming up. So they have just put in issues, and what we will do is we will stick to the contemporary issues discussion as far as, the content is concerned. But I think this itself should have been a separate unit. So this unit, if you ask me, is actually three things. It is about history. It is talking about the several other ancillary industries which work very closely with this sector. They have kind of muddled in contemporary tourism and also brought in another unit which is called destination management. Now, I know for sure that one of the levels that we teach and deliver in the OTHM qualification itself has, I'm pretty sure, destination management is a separate unit. Antonel, do you recall, did you do this in the
level 5?
Level 5?
And I think as well, contemporary issues, I did that in level 5 as well.
That's correct. So that is the first unit that you did, and that's the whole unit. And then I think I'm not too sure. I'm just wanting to look at, I think in level 6 or 7, destination management is definitely a separate unit. So can't be wrong, but in level 7. So destination management, is definitely a separate unit, and this more focuses on marketing, event management, the operators and different types of business models which are coming in, which actually are used in promoting a location as a destination. For example, if I look at the Southeast Asia, you look at locations like Bangkok, Phuket, Mauritius, Maldives. They are absolutely dependent on tourism. So Madagascar, for example, now these places essentially look at destination management, and this is a big area there because in even Caribbean, for example, where you are, Antonel, that is also, and when we look at Europe, we look at places like, let's put it this way, places, Ibiza, some of these Spanish islands that we go across to, these places are Greece, for example, they are absolutely dependent on tourism as an economy.
Yes.
And here, what you see is that, the concept of destination management actually, then just steps in. So the whole economy, the whole government, the infrastructure, everything is actually geared in, to basically look at the development of tourism in order to bring in, revenue, tourists coming into the country, and that is why it's destination management. So I think this is going to be a bit of an interesting unit. So don't get me wrong when I jump from one topic to the other, because I think I kind of grappled with to collate some presentations which I've done now for the full unit, but because they were a combination of a couple of things, I think it'll give you a bit of a overview, a bird's eye overview of some of the key concepts. But I think in general, if you're looking at studying, what I will also do is I will send you some handouts, which are handouts which I've downloaded, obviously from the internet. There is a book also for this particular unit that you can refer, but at the same point in time, the handouts that I'm going to try and send over, will basically, give you, I think, more in-depth, summarized in-depth knowledge about what these issues are, why do you need to look at them, and obviously, how they can be addressed going forward. So let's look at a few slides, and what I've done is I've got about some 20 odd slides. There are some backup slides that I've put in place, which is to understand specifically the impact of technology, which is coming into this sector. And then some of the slides, you will see some, slide notes which I put in. They might be useful for you to kind of build into a bit of introduction, for this unit, or when you're doing your tasks, it might be helpful for you to bring in some of these snippets to explain, the history or, how the sector is evolving and things like that. Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Good stuff. Now, let's look at with the definition of, starting with definition of tourism, I know we're doing this course, which is level 4 course, and everything in every name, in terms of every unit, the name tourism comes across so many times. So what I thought was basically to start this off, and because it's the last unit that we are covering, the idea would be to try and just summarize what is the definition of tourism and then start from there. So I picked out two definitions in particular. One, which is the United Nations World Travel Organization definition, which is what most of us can correlate to. And apart from that, what I've done is I picked up a contemporary definition, which is an evolving one, which has come across from an academic book, and they are on the slide. So tourism as a activity, is defined as temporary movement of people, because you're not looking at going to stay there permanently, relocate or immigrate. So because it's a temporary travel that you do for leisure or any other purposes, and you undertake some activities in a location when you go, and primarily for leisure or visiting that location, these then tend to kind of comprise the definition of what is tourism in general as an activity. So it's a temporary movement of people to destinations outside their normal places of work and residence, and activities undertaken during the stay in those destinations and facilities created to cater to them. Now, work and play or work and residence have been taken is because now it is clearly established that we travel not just for leisure, but we also travel for work. And when you're traveling for work, some of the activities that you end up doing in that location will be also termed as tourism activities, but they will be classified under, say, for example, work tourism, or they'll be classified under MICE as we would call it.
Yeah.
The United Nations definition basically focuses on bringing across things like again, it kind of focuses on saying activities engaged by a person temporarily away from their usual environment. So they shy away from saying either it's work or residence, but for not more than 12 months for a wide range of purposes. So their definition is quite broad. Sometimes you have people going into location, or companies posting their people as expats into destinations to set up a business or set up operations, and they also get a bit of a transfer going into that location on a temporary basis. But that temporary basis could be a duration of up to a year. So as long as you're there for up to a year, as per United Nations World Travel Organization, it is still considered that you're traveling for tourism, because you're not looking at settling there or immigrating. And any range of activities that you do, which is coordinating or relating to the purposes of leisure work, or activities which are related to excluding income. That means if I set up a hotel or a bed and breakfast in somewhere in Spain as a location, and I spend 6 months there, then I would not be looking at that as a tourist activity or under the definition of tourism, because I have created a permanent stay and a permanent business in that location, so that's slightly different. But as long as you're not earning anything from that activity, you might be posted there as an expat and you're receiving a salary, but because that is temporary, it's still classified under the definition of something called tourism. Is that okay? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Now, going into some of the slides which primarily will cover your task 1.1, and it talks about looking at the historical developments of tourism and how it originated over the years. So what I've done is I've kind of summarized this into a couple of slides. Basically, if we look at the concept of tourism, this concept of tourism was maybe has originated as back as 4000 BC. So what we do see is that there are some, let's put it this way, some references to this, to the, the Roman Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Greeks in particular. But when we study the history of travel and tourism, what has happened is they've kind of classified into 4 or 5 different eras. So the early history, or the early travelers basically, looked at the concept of just, lodging. That means if there was a travel happening, they needed only places to stay. But as the concept has evolved, what we've seen is, and I'll go through some of the slides, which basically talks about the early travelers looked at only migrating for food and hunting. So that means they went from location to location as nomads. And obviously the main aim was to look at, food and hunting. At some point in time, the travel also started to happen when lodgings became permanent. So when we look at a few slides going down the line, when we look at when the British started this particular sector in the 1700s, or just after the French Revolution, you will see that every 25 miles there were, stay areas or lodgings which were created. So it just did not cater for food, but also overnight resting or shelter. And that kind of has a very structured, beginning, shows a very structured beginning of how, this particular sector actually originated. But yes, a couple of points which I put in is the Empire era, which talks about, in the olden days, when the elite, the king and the monarchy or the royalty used to travel, there used to be large, congregations of people traveling with them. And that was primarily, to look at security, safety, but also have, other features like, co-host and workers working for them. But that used to be the era wherein, obviously the whole populations moved from time to time. And that was primarily for business, for leisure activities, for food, for hunting, for lots of other reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the Middle Ages, when we talk about, 5th to the 14th century and just the Renaissance era, what we look at is because of, different or, sects of, human race coming across, when we see the proliferation of human race happening in Africa, in the Middle East, in the European, Ottoman Empire, leading up to the, the Greek and the Romans in particular. And we also look at the Southeast Asia, and then the voyages when it started to happen, when, people started to venture into sea using boats and things like that. What we do see that at some point in time, this particular activity in the Middle Ages basically disappeared. And this disappeared primarily because of a couple of things. One, because of the wars and famines, which primarily originated. Some of them primarily happened because of, large, I would say, swathes of population, traveling in certain directions, specifically the Middle East, I would say the China, and then the Crusades, which were the holy wars, which predominantly erupted between, the Muslims and the Christians, which were over the Holy Land. So that side of, timetable, when we look at this particular sector, saw a bit of a decline. But later on, there was a bit of a resurgence in this. And in the Renaissance era, what we do see is that there were delegations or, congregations of people sent across to establish trade links with different countries. And that is where essentially what happened is we see sea travel starting to originate. And because of this sea travel starting to originate, trade ties and links were starting to get established with Africa, Far East Asia, and, the other places within Europe and on the east and the west coast of Africa. And that is where, again, this sector, you will see that starts to kind of resurge in that Renaissance era. Now, the main development of this sector essentially has happened between, the 16th century and the 17th or the 18th century. And that is where the trend was actually started by the English. That means the British actually started the trend, and this basically meant that the establishment of, bed and breakfast or some sort of lodging facilities every 25 miles, wherever the, the East India Company to a certain extent started to extend, colonize lots of countries or, colonies in particular, they started this particular concept of, what is called the luxurious travel. So it was not just for, bed and breakfast, but it was for leisure activities, because lots of congregations of, armed forces used to travel, soldiers used to travel. So it basically became, let's put it this way, a reason for travel, because they looked at not just food, not just looking at, leisure, but also stay and lodging. But also at the same point in time, it was more about, looking at conquering lands and, establishing the culture in terms of the British Raj and other things in some of these colonies. So that is how the Spanish, the French, and the British, but, this is how it started off. And obviously, in this time period is what we see, that we see some civilized roots of, the modern history of travel and tourism getting established in most geographies. Okay. And here, because the sea routes to a certain extent were very well established, travel became a necessity. So that means there was increased transportation of, raw material, goods and services. When we look at, when we look at people, forced labor being brought across from countries, that is where civilized, travel, or basically sea travel, when it became mandatory, what we do get to see is that this is where the modern settings of travel and tourism actually, started to set in.
Okay.
And then we look at the era of mobility. That means just with, when the industrialization started to happen, what we do see is that there was growing economic prosperity. That means a lot of material being brought across. Specifically, if I look at just UK as a country, a lot of cotton, a lot of other raw material was brought across to say, for example, cities like Liverpool, Newcastle, in the UK, where most of the factories and everything, production units were established. And this then assured the era wherein obviously, mobility became important. So it was not just in the form of, sea travel, but obviously rail to a certain extent it started, roads were being built, and so the well-established routes that we talk about, the trade routes, across various, continents got established. So there was a trade route, which is the Silk Route, as we call it, between China and Europe, which was an established route. There was a sea route, which was established between some of the channels, looking at Mediterranean, looking at, Atlantic, looking at the Indian Ocean. And these places basically then had what you call the fixed routes, which meant that travel could happen and regular travel could happen. And because of which also this sector then looked at, developing into not just looking at, travel and lodging, fooding, but also leisure to a larger extent. So leisure as a aspect actually started to happen sometime in the 18th century, and that kind of paved the way for looking at setting the modern forms of travel and tourism that we do see within this within this industry. Now the last era that we look at is the modern era, as we call it, the modern era, and that is from 1945 onwards. And when we look at this era, because of certain things like rail transport being established in certain countries, the advent of motor cars, or cars essentially as an industry, which came across in the early 1900s in terms of Henry Ford introducing cars, economic activity and the disposable income increasing, air travel to a certain extent becoming a reality. So when we look at the early starts of the air travel just after the post-World War II era, what we do see is the air travel between Europe and America and certain locations in the Asian countries became kind of a mandatory reality, or became possible in the early 60s. And obviously a lot of people could then look at sea, road and air travel happening, and that is where you get to see that the modern routes of tourism actually have got established.
Okay.
Now you see that obviously after the 1990s, or when we see in particular after 2002, just after the dot-com bubble burst, after 2002, wherein most of the developing countries, when we say in the Asian economy, Asia really contributes about 43%, travel in terms of, passenger numbers and things like that. So we look at Asia as the largest market in terms of tourism, in terms of people traveling from Asia, to different destinations. The second biggest market is Americas, and then we look at Europe, and then we look at Africa. So when we look at the modern context, what we do get to see is that the fast-paced growth of tourism and the hospitality sector has actually happened, after 2002. And there are three reasons for it. One is economic prosperity. The second important reason that we look at is the development of transportation links. The third thing that we look at is the development of infrastructure in most of the countries, which is infrastructure both in terms of rail travel, road travel, and airline travel. Then we also look One of the other reasons being reasons which is faster pace of development happening in emerging economies. So when we talk about the world's G20, places where a lot of development is happening, both in terms of infrastructure and technology integration into tourism and hospitality sector in general, we do get to see that in these countries, the influx of tourists or people traveling to these countries have drastically increased. Now, this was, I don't know how many of you know, which is the most, traveled or most frequently traveled country in the world? Where do you think, which country enjoys the maximum number of tourists every year, or people coming into the country every year? Can you make a guess, or if you know?
Is it the UK?
No, I don't think it's the UK. Chelsea, any guesses from your end? Any other guesses, Antonio?
America or Australia?
Right, yes. So up until last year, America was, the most frequented tourist destination in the world, and they attract about 78 million tourists across the year. So every year, up until last year, this year, France has overtaken, America. So it has 80.1 million, tourists in 2020. When I say this year, 2017. So France is the most preferred, destination for travel across the globe, and they get about some 80 million tourists or visitors which come and visit the country every year. Second important destination is US. The third is that you rightly said, Chelsea, which is Spain. So Spain gets about 16 million visitors every year, so somewhere in that region. So these are the top 3 tourist destinations that we look at, which are coming up or have been. America has been the top destination for a couple of years, but obviously it's been unseated by France, I think last year. Now, within these countries, if you look at 42% of visitors are actually coming in from Asia. So that means China contributes some 22% of people in China because of the economic, economic status and, the mobility in that country. 22% of all visitors across the world today are Chinese. So they are now traveling quite heavily because of economic prosperity. We look at the development of rail links or transportation links, and some 39% of all infrastructure development projects in the world are currently happening in China. So if you look at some stage from the 1970s to up till 2010, or say just up to early 2005, America was the most frequented destination. Most of the projects, everything in terms of investment, development was happening within the States. But now the shift is happening, and all that is happening in China. So China has much better, wider, bigger infrastructure than US today. And what is expected is the Chinese tourism and, tourism ministry predicts that it will become the most frequented and most visited destination by 2030. So we do see that a lot of districts or provinces in China, not districts, provinces in China, have embarked on very aggressive tourism campaigns to make them the city or the provinces of the year, or for next 2 years, 3 years, in order to bring tourism to the country. So some of them, are quite clearly seen on, different television channels. But the changing focus is definitely that, China will become one of the most frequented destinations by 2030 because of the diversity it has, the culture it has, and the rich history it has in terms of its culture. So Chinese culture is a good 3,000-4,000 years old, and that is why, there's lots to see in China. And because of the scale of the development happening, or which has happened essentially in terms of, rail infrastructure in particular, it'll be surprising to note for most of you, or, for both of you in any case, would be that China has more bullet trains than all the countries combined in Europe. Do you know this? And the average speed of bullet trains in China is 300 kilometers an hour, whereas we have only the French rail, or maybe one or the other rail, which basically, when they experiment, obviously they say they can reach speeds of 300, 400 kilometers per hour, but in China, most bullet trains are running at about 260 to 300 kilometers an hour. So
Wow.
because it's a vast country, they have invested everything in them. Lots of money has gone into the upgrade and the investment in terms of building the infrastructure on rail side, and that is where China is now becoming more accessible in terms of travel, in particular, and that's why the UN WTO as a body predicts that it will become one of the most frequented destinations by 2030. So, in short, if you look at just the history of tourism, what we do see, there are 4 phases. We look at something which is pretty old, like before Christ, which is up to 4000 BC. We look at Egyptians, Romans, and all that, and then we look at the first phase, which is primarily in the initial beginnings. Then we look at the 5th to the 14th century. That's the second phase. Third we look at is the middle of the 16th century and just after the Renaissance era. And then we look at the French Revolution and the establishment of trade links and routes, especially started off by the British, then followed by the Spanish and the French, which led to the mass colonization of different countries, in the early 18th and the 19th century. And that is where we see the modern context of, when I say history, but in the modern context, look at studying, how the history of tourism actually came about. But the actual developments, the past these developments have really happened, after, I would say, World War II, and especially because of the, industrialization which started to happen after, World War II in terms of rebuilding of nations and things like that. So from 1945 onwards, what we do see that this then became, something which was, this basically gave this is where we actually see the beginnings of the, the modern travel, tourism, and hospitality sector in particular. And then 2000 onwards, because of the growth which has happened, the economic prosperity, the developments which are happening, the establishments of, trade links, and also to a larger extent, the development of infrastructure has basically, allowed tourism to flourish, wherein people now have the money, have the, the means of transport to travel. And because this has become easily available, that has actually led to the rise of this particular sector. And now, in one of the slides, I have put across, statistics primarily for, what does this sector contribute? How many people actually travel? So the last estimate in 2013 was, which was under projections, was that up to 1 billion people will travel worldwide on tourism or tourism-related activities. Now, this is expected to go to 1.8 billion by 2020. So when you look at a population, the world population of roughly, approximately reaching 8 billion, we have about 1.8 billion people which will travel on tourism or related activities by 2020. So this sector is now the 3rd or the 4th largest employer in the world, is the 3rd largest sector in the world in terms of revenue generation. And I have put some details specifically for UK, which basically says that in the UK, the industry is actually, in terms of the revenue and the size, is 46 billion in terms of, revenues coming to the UK economy. And in this, out of that 46 billion, some 34 billion is collected in tax revenues, creating 2.44 million or about 2.5 million jobs in this sector. And this is the 5th largest employer in the UK. Okay. So indirectly and directly 2.4 million jobs, but directly 1.2 million people are employed within this sector. And that is roughly 8% of UK employment figures. This is as per 2016. Okay. So it is quite a big sector, and obviously, a lot of revenue comes in to the government, especially HMRC, when we look at travel, tourism, and hospitality. And this is the 5th largest employer as far as UK is concerned. Worldwide, this industry is the 3rd largest employer of people. It's the 4th largest industry in terms of revenue. And this is the only industry which has been growing for the last 15 years at an average rate of about 4% or 4.5% year on year. So there is no slowdown in terms of the growth of this industry. and the annual growth rate is about 4.1% as per the last report of 2017. Okay. So it gives you a bit of a bird's eye view in terms of how this came across. When I was trying to, there is a video that I could have played, which is about 4 or 5 minutes, which is on YouTube, and this is a website which I looked at in particular to try, and I'm going to send you this link. And this website basically, very neatly summarizes how travel is involved over the years. Where did the word hospitality, travel tourism came about? So, I've kind of shared that, okay, French word of hospice actually means hospitality. And, this is good two-page reading, which I will send across to you as a link. And if you look at reading this, it will give you a good idea in terms of how how this industry has evolved over the years. And the pioneers are essentially in terms of helping to set this up. The credit goes to, in the modern context, goes to the French and the British, because they were the ones which kind of established hospitality and, the whole setting of, travel, tourism, and, providing services which are related to food, leisure, entertainment, and, things like that. So it's a good two-page. I think these are extracts from some places somebody has put together on a bit of a blog, but I think it gives you a very good understanding of how the sector has evolved. And it's a it'll take about 5 or 6 minutes for you to read, but it's a 2-3 page read, which is good enough to give you a good understanding.
Okay.
Now going across to learning outcome 2, which is basically understanding now once we know how do I would like to put it across is that once that this sector is obviously a growing sector, this sector employs a lot of people, a lot of livelihoods are dependent on this sector. This sector has lots of different involvement from other industries in terms of functioning and operations. Now what we do want to understand is what are the key things which impact this sector. Now, there are loads of things that we can study. So we can look at things like government legislation. We could look at yesterday's session in Unit 5 that we were looking at. We were looking at some idea of, under the event management, something called sustainable tourism development, sustainability in particular. We were looking at ethics, the carbon emissions, things like that. So there are lots of factors which affect this particular sector. But I think in general, what we want to understand is the effects of 3 things which we want to study with regards to the learning outcome 1 and task 1.2. Now, one of them is how is technology contributing to this sector, and what are the impacts of embracing technology or bringing technological advancement to this sector. That is what we will look at first. The second, what we want to look at is we want to understand what are the economic impact which this sector has on the local economy, a country, a community, and things like that. And the third would be to understand what are the changes it is bringing into society, and that is what is under the social changes happening when we look at this particular industry. So let's briefly look at technology first and get it out of the way because it's easy to understand.
Yeah.
Now the context here would be to look at some of these slides would be to understand that over the years, if you recall or if you remember, when is the first time you traveled with your parents, maybe on a small holiday or a small vacation. And if you understand that context, which was maybe 10, 15 years back, or howsoever back you can go, 5 years, 6 years, and you relate that to a travel that you do today, what are the key things that you see as a differentiator? One is, if I have to look at a few, just very briefly to get this discussion started, would be that I think 5 years back, 6 years back, or maybe even 10 years back when we traveled, the internet was not available in your rooms. So you probably had just the business centers from which you could do a bit of emailing or check your emails. Definitely. So internet has been one of the enablers. That means most hotels, most places that you go to, Wi-Fi and internet is something now considered a standard, thing that you expect the hotel to provide.
Yeah.
So if you look at that context and you look at 5, 7 years back or the first vacation you took with your parents, and you try and visualize what were the differences in terms of technology that you felt, that would give you the answers or understanding of this particular task. So Antonella, any points that you would want to add?
Well, for me, technology has really impacted because, like, for instance, for me, being in the Caribbean, I mean, technology has brought us closer to places like Europe and so forth. Without technology, we are basically cut off from the rest of the world.
Correct. Yeah, that's a very valid point. Chelsea, can you think of something?
What that was around when I went on holiday before?
Yeah.
Yeah, social media wasn't a thing I'd heard of when I was little, when I used to go on holiday, which is now such a massive part. Whenever you go on social media, they advertise holidays and things, but that was nothing when I was little. I'd never heard of it before or seen adverts on social media for holidays.
Yeah, that's also definitely correct. So I think when you look at now, if you try and maybe dig into a bit more deeper to look at some of the holidays or vacations that you took 5 years, 7 years back, would be things like, most places used to kind of give you catalogs or, printed material for you to look at the information on that destination. Maybe the prevalence of websites, wasn't there maybe 10 years back. Yeah, the hotels or maybe some of the destinations definitely had websites 10 years back, but the websites were not that informative. For example, sometimes now what you want to do is you want to book a hotel, but you want to see the room on the website, how the room is and, how the 3D view is. So some of these things, I think, like you said, social media, like you said, the development of the technology in terms of internet coming in. So, connectivity has made lots of things possible. And what that has done is that different forms of media are now available at a click of a button, and they are able to give you information about, say, things like, prices, opening hours, bookings that you can do. Like I remember, I think in 2002, when I went to Madame Tussauds in London, I couldn't book tickets online. But today, if you have to go to any destination in London, you could probably book tickets online, which are cheaper than when you buy it, in certain locations. And that is something which most of these tourist information centers do in order to reduce queues or congestion, at the venues. So they try and advertise that why don't you book your tickets through the website before you even travel. Eventbrite, which is one of the websites which has come across, which, provides tickets and bookings for events which happen all across the globe. So these things are leading to something called modernization, but also making, accessibility of information within this sector far more easily consumable by anybody anywhere across the globe. So social media, you read reviews. For example, if you book a hotel, you want to go in and see the reviews. Trustpilot, for example, you look at TripAdvisor, some of these websites, and most of these places you would go in before you book your holiday or before you book your vacation, because you want to kind of look at reviews and how the customer service is and the facilities are, and you go to the websites to look at, no, I don't like this hotel, I think the rooms are not that nice, they're too small and things like that. So you can make those judgments because of the expectation that you have some of these things now available, which primarily weren't probably there 10 years back. So this sector has seen, like a lot of other sectors, a drastic impact of integration and implementation of, or embracing of technology into into the day-to-day working and operations of say for example the activities. So that's what I've done is I've summarized that on about 2 slides here, and we've kind of hit the point that now we understand what is the impact of technology. Now the other thing that you see when we look at the impact of technology is it has also led to the little bit of, I would use the word like, eradication of middlemen in terms of bookings that you do, from the high street. For example, we have Thomas Cook, Expedia, some of these vendors are still there. But what has happened is we are now looking at the internet and the offers to be able to book our holidays and vacations. And sometimes you're able to get better offers than what the agents and the middlemen or the, the operators are able to actually offer you in terms of deals and packages. So technology is also enabling a cutthroat competition. So look at the positive aspect and also the negative side of the aspect, negative side or the disadvantageous side for the industry. But for a consumer, as a consumer, it's good for me because I have lots of choices now. I have lots of places to bargain for and get the offers and the deals, and I want to get as low or as better as prices as possible than go across through these intermediaries or the operators in particular. But the model is continuously evolving. So you see that a lot of websites, they are able to still offer you the deals, but they are still able to make money, and they act as now what you call the online operators rather than the traditional brick and mortar operators that we used to see or travel agents that we used to see in the high street. So there's a large scale churn happening within the industry because of technology being adopted. And this is having a significant impact on a good note for the consumer because we are able to get cheaper prices like flights or the hotels and the activities that we want to do when we are there, and that allows us to look at this because of technology making it possible. And when we look at the industry, the last point I would probably add in this would be for technology would be that there is a lot of change which is happening now. If I look at 10 years back, I think I probably traveled the first time and it was 1997. And at that point in time, there was no centralized, I think at that point in time, there was a centralized booking system being introduced in some of the big chains like Ritz, Four Seasons, Hilton. These were introducing, a central reservation or a booking system. Because sometimes if you had to travel, you had to literally ring up the location to find out if there's a booking available because the live data in terms of number of rooms and other things weren't available because there was no centralized booking and registration system available. So one of the first ones which came out was a company which basically came out with a system called Amadeus. Now this one was the first booking system I think introduced somewhere in the early 90s or 1995, 96, and this allowed reservations to happen over the phone because the hotel or the reception, the front office essentially had the ability to be able to look at how many rooms are vacant, which rooms are available. Otherwise, it used to be done all manually on the registers. So upgrade of technology and the adoption of technology within the sector is also increasing operational and bringing operational efficiency into the sector. So there is use of technology now today to, one of the points which I picked up was, say, for example, in wildlife conservation. So we go across to a lot of safari parks because we do see that, these safari parks are created, man-made creations, and essentially here the development, upkeep, and, the maintenance of wildlife populations within those parks is happening because of technology, because of the tagging, electronic tagging, which is happening with, the inhabitants of that park, specifically the animals. So a lot of this is happening because of technology, and technology is having, in general, everybody agrees across the industry, a very positive impact on this particular sector. Is that in agreement?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at briefly studying what are the economic impacts. Now, some of the facts that we know clearly is that why tourism has started to happen and did not happen in the early 1900 or before that, or only a very few people traveled, and now we have about 1 billion people traveling, or 1.5 billion people traveling this year or next year, is because it is driven by economic prosperity. That means people have money to spend, disposable incomes are available, and in some cases, because of the development of infrastructure and the availability of, let's put it this way, the destinations in terms of the travel time and the distance has minimized because of technology, or say, for example, airline travel and things like that. That has made tourism possible, and that is why it is growing. Now, economic impact would be primarily directly related to something called, I would say, disposable income or economic prosperity. So here, as per World Trade Organization or World Travel Organization, not Trade, World Travel Organization, they are saying tourism is one of the top 5 exports, as far as most countries are concerned. So in some cases, like I gave you examples of, tourist dependent economies like Maldives, Mauritius, Bangkok, you look at Caribbean in particular, some of the other Spanish destinations. There, most of the, revenue is actually coming in from tourism. So in tourism, we look at import and you look at export. So export is when people from Britain actually travel outside, and import is when people from other countries travel to Britain for tourism. So most places would see that, when this kind of an import-export, that means influx of people or outflux of people is happening in a particular country, you will see that foreign exchange earnings, which basically, are the currency which people will travel with to spend in a particular location, actually brings in revenue to the local economy. So in general, what is happening is, if I'm planning to go to the US, I would need some dollars, which I would need to carry, or I would do most of the spending through the card. But when you're doing the spending there, that is bringing foreign currency to the economy, and that is directly coming because of tourism activity. So one of the clear impacts is that it helps develop local economy, it brings revenue to the local economy, and obviously is a driver of, increasing sales or revenue related to activities which are happening in travel and tourism. Now, the second impact that we see because of this is jobs being created. So because if this is a regular activity, a lot of countries, a lot of places have tourism departments, and these departments are responsible for setting policies, procedures in place, and creating annual calendars or, annualized calendars of tourism activity. And because this has become now a sustainable year-long kind of activity in most locations, wherever there is tourists and tourist-related activities happening, this has led to the creation of employment within that particular, location. And employment or generation of jobs is the second most economic factor, which is what we see as an impact happening on tourism. So 11% of global workforce is actually working within travel and tourism sector, right? So if I look at just Britain, if we say there are about 36 million people employed within the UK, and if we have to roughly take out 11% of that, what we are looking at is, I would say, roughly 1.5, 1.6 million people, which obviously is the data which is given, but a rough appropriation, would be higher because it will come out to be about, I would say roughly about 10 to 11 million people, but there would be direct as well as indirect employments related to this sector. So this is the 5th largest job creation sector within the UK, as we saw in the first slide. So 2.2 million or 2.4 million, if I remember correctly, are the number of people employed by this sector directly. So one of the economic impacts is brings in revenue. Second would be creates jobs. And the third is, because a lot of money transactions happen, it also creates revenue for our banking system because of the foreign exchange earnings which the banks are able to make. So sometimes you go in and you say, okay, I need to change pounds to euros. There's a bit of a fraction fee which most of these money exchanges banks charge, and that helps them earn something called foreign exchange earnings, and that also brings money into the banking system.
Okay.
Now, sometimes you will see that the last point on this slide is that if a country is focused on developing tourism, you will see a lot of investment going into other infrastructure-related projects. And that also indirectly tends to drive employment, for the local sector or for the local economy. So if we took an example of Olympics, in some of the other sessions in Unit 5, it'll be good to relate to it here is that when you see cities bidding for the Olympics to host the Olympics, and there's an 8-year time cycle wherein they're awarded, but they get ready for that, there's a lot of large-scale infrastructure development which happens within those cities. And when you look at that development is bringing in not just development in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of jobs, which will be, created for a short period. When I say short period, 3, 4, 5 years, but that will lead to the overall development of, the economy in that location or in that city. Correct?
Okay.
Now, sometimes you will see, and this is an example that, say, for example, when people come into the UK, they buy a lot of goods and services from the duty free, and you pay some custom tax and things like that in other countries. What tends to happen is if you're not a permanent resident here, whatever money you spend can actually be claimed back, or VAT, essentially value added tax, actually could be claimed back if you've done some shopping from duty free shops. So when
Yeah.
you collection of those tax receipts, and it creates a lot of livelihood for businesses in that location. So when you look at most airports, a lot of airports, they have large duty free shops and lots of duty free shops. So if you look at the
Yeah.
terminal, in Heathrow, that probably has, I think, good 200-300 shops, restaurants, and all types of shops that you can see. So when people spend money when they are traveling in, or they're in transit, that also relates to what you call tax receipts, or receipts for in terms of income for businesses, and also for the government, because a lot of people are buying because they do perceive or see that things are cheaper in duty free, and you can claim some form of taxation back, and that also leads to what you call economic benefit. Is that okay? So are the economic benefits clear?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. Any comments, Chelsea and Antonel, from your end?
No.
Okay, good stuff. So let's look at very briefly now the impacts of, what are the social impacts on tourism. Now, when we talk about the context of social impact, what we're basically looking at is understanding how it affects the local community, the local traditions, the people living in a particular area, when people are coming in on a tourist or a travel activity temporarily to a location. So here, the basic impacts that we see, which are currently realized, are that it creates, something called an acceptance of culture. So when you go and travel to new locations, you experience new cultures, and you develop more knowledge about that culture, which in general creates more acceptability of the people in the culture of that location. Simple enough, clear enough? Yeah. So for example, if I've not been to China, when I go to China for the first time, what will happen is I'll experience their culture, certain things which I'll pick up that they like, do not like, and that will bring me a bit more closer to understanding how Chinese people are, or how they in general behave when they meet, say when you meet them for business or personal or professional visits.
Okay.
The thing that we see with regards to this is that sometimes when you're traveling, what tends to happen is you are in a way kind of forced to observe local traditions, or certain things which are a part and parcel in that society. So a lot of us, when we travel to Middle East, what we've realized is that you can't do certain things. For example, alcohol, consumption is prohibited. So sometimes what we do see that social impacts of tourism create increased awareness about the local traditions when you are traveling into that particular destination. So in certain countries in the Middle East, like alcohol consumption in public locations is not allowed, is not freely allowed. So if you're seen to be consuming alcohol on a beach, or for example in other locations which are considered public locations, you could be fined or you could be jailed. So the increased interaction when you travel to certain locations like these, the tourism department and the ministry makes you aware that if you're going to a particular country, you need to be aware of this, you need to be aware of that, so that you don't get into trouble. And that is where sometimes you will see the awareness leads to the creation of mutual respect for the local traditions in that country. And that is again one of the social impacts. Now, some economies obviously, or some places that you travel to, they accept everything, and obviously it is considered, there are no warnings given. But in certain cases, what you will see is that some of these places are also evolving with times, but the pace at which the evolution is happening to certain things in particular is not there, and those intolerances you tend to develop when you visit these locations. So that is a social impact. You wouldn't have been aware of it otherwise, but because you're visiting and you've chosen to go there on business or personal travel or tourist, as a visitor, you are making yourself aware of those traditions.
Okay.
Now, that point also links to something called, understanding of faith. And sometimes you will see that if you go into a new location, like if you travel to Burma, which is predominantly a Buddhist country, you will see that you will also be able to pick up certain things which are related to, their faith and culture, which are part and parcel of their day-to-day, working or day-to-day, activities that they do in their lives. So here you will see that a lot of people, sometimes an example that I would give here would be that because economic migration, one of the key reasons why migration happens is because of economic reasons. So a lot of people who have traveled, say for example from outside Africa or from large economies like India and China, they sometimes, when they go back and visit their communities, is a chance for them to connect with their ancestry, or a chance for them to connect with their roots. And that also then has a bit of a social impact, because it helps you reconnect with your past or your ancestry in certain locations or in certain situations. So when you look at President Obama visiting Kenya, because his dad initially was from Kenya, or he had some family history in Kenya. So when he went to Kenya, his reasons of traveling to Kenya was to look at primarily the concept of, let's put it this way, visiting his ancestors, or looking at going to a location wherein he wanted to connect with his ancestry and his past. Am I correct on that, Antonio? I think if I remember my history correctly, yes, I know he did travel to Kenya, but obviously, yes, and the reasons why you do that is sometimes you want to connect with your past, you want to connect with your elders and your community and things like that. That also is one of the social impacts. Now, what I've done is I've summarized these impacts of when we say what are the social impacts on these bullet points here. Now, the overarching theme in terms of understanding social impacts of tourism is primarily to look at ways of sustainability, which is involved in the preserving of ethics and local traditions for the community. So here, one of the key things that we look at is sometimes you will see that people will not go across and do something in a particular location if they have been pre-warned, is because they do see that this is taken as offensive by the locals who live in that location when you're visiting the country, or when you're visiting a location. So you need to be able to develop cultural acceptance. Your awareness is generally quite increased, and whatever interactions you tend to do are done from a point of view of you trying to develop more understanding and more knowledge about the location that you're visiting. And that tends to be, the social impact of tourism. When we look at the context of why people travel, they sometimes come across with, statements like, I like experiencing new cultures, or I like meeting new people, or I like traveling because it gives me an opportunity to kind of mingle with different types of people, learn different, things, pick up traditions, or learn something different about that culture. So those are things that we normally get to hear when we get to do discussions or chatting in terms of when we look at, okay, why are you traveling, why have you picked up that destination, is that something that you really like? Okay, yeah, I go there because I like this, I like the food, I like the people, I like the weather, things like that. So those are things which then start to relate back into something called the social and the community aspect of how it relates to tourism. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Now, last but not the least, what we are looking at covering is, contemporary issues or factors basically which we see affecting tourism and hospitality industry. Now, it will be good for me because we are not looking at studying the full unit. We are not looking at studying contemporary tourism. We are just looking at issues. So what I've done is I've put in a bit of a definition in terms of what is a contemporary issue first. Now, a contemporary issue is, it is defined as an idea, event, opinion, topic, whatever, but this is relevant to present day. That means an issue which is relevant today, an issue which is an ongoing issue. So a contemporary issue would be defined as something which is ongoing, a problem that you see, or an issue that you see which is ongoing, and it is totally relevant to the modern times or things that you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And in general, if I say these issues bring across positive or negative aspects into the outcomes. So there is because of the issue which arises, you will either have a positive outcome or you'll have a negative outcome. Either you'll have some advantage or you'll have a disadvantage. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you look at understanding contemporary factors or factors which are going to be issues on an ongoing basis in this industry, we will study a few. And the few that I've listed out, and this is a term that you will primarily see which comes across quite often, there are something called the 4 C's, which are very particular and pertinent to the travel, tourism, hospitality sector. And these are ongoing issues within the sector. One of the key issues now today is costs. I want to book a hotel, a 4-star or a 5-star hotel. The cost can start from anywhere like £110 to go up to £350 in the city of London. So costs, and because there are so many choices available, there is an increasing pressure on the hotels and the tour operators, whatever you call it, to minimize cost, but also try and be in that consideration set when you're trying to book a hotel. So you look at websites like Trivago, you look at other websites, wherein you can go and do a bit of comparison when you're booking a hotel. Costs, the reason why you're on a site, the reason why you're visiting some of these sites is because you want competitive prices, or you want the best possible cost that you can actually get for a particular room or for a particular package or for a particular vacation. Okay? Cost is going to be one of the issues. Now, cost is price for customer, but when I look at cost, it tends to be operational cost, efficiency costs, for the hotel industry. So in this case, an example of a hotel, most managers would work in shifts, most staff works in shifts. If the hotel is still, is not fully occupied, the occupancy is 30%, 50%, 100%, does not matter, but you need a certain number of staff to be employed within the hotel. So there are costs which are there from the time that the operation starts, and it does not depend on how many people or the occupancy rates in the hotel, because there are certain fixed costs which the hotel or hotel chains have to incur in order to keep the operations running. So there's a pressure on costs, and that is why it's a contemporary issue. The second thing that we look at is in the 4 C's is competition. Now, as this industry is growing, everybody wants a pie of it. Everybody wants to get more business out of it. There is cutthroat competition within this sector. So sometimes when you're visiting a particular location, you have the option of looking at, over the years, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star. Do you want to stay in a 5-star? Do you want to look at an inn? Do you want to look at a bed and breakfast? Do you want to do Airbnb? Those kind of options have now become available. And I'm just taking the example of the hotel industry in particular. If we look at airline, which is a subsidiary industry within this sector, there are lots of competition within that as well. So when you look at EasyJet and Ryanair, you look at some of the other low-cost flyers, within Europe. With Lufthansa, they have a economy side of airlines. You look at Air France, they have economic side of the airline. You look at British Airways, they do a lot of offers through Iberia or Flybe and things like that. So here, competition is key. That means it is again an ongoing big issue, and that is why competition in terms of prices and costs and other things are always a contemporary issue in this sector. The third that we look at, the 3rd C is customer satisfaction. Right? If you go and stay in a particular location and you're not happy with the service, if you've not been given the service that you expect that you should have been given or you have received, then in that case you would not go into that location again, or you would not book that hotel again. You might leave a review which is going to be negative. It will do more damage to the hotel reputation or the location's reputation, and they will also lose a customer. So the industry spends a lot of money on trainings and a lot of other things in order to ensure that whatever they provide leads to the desired customer satisfaction, and they set levels and they set targets and they want to meet these targets. So this is an ongoing issue because there's a lot of costs which get apportioned to making sure that the customers being served or the quality of service that they get at the end of the day, they are satisfied and they get customer satisfaction. A simple example, which could be that when you look at, say for example, you've gone into a hotel, you go into a buffet, you order something, and you find your tea has come across and it's a bit cold, or you do not find the tea to be the right taste. So what you do is you call somebody and you say, okay, I don't find, can you replace the pot of tea, please? And then that one, which is looking at that, they can't basically say that we can't do it or it cannot be done, no, it's warm enough and all that. But because they have to look at customer satisfaction, sometimes you will see that this industry creates a lot of waste, but that is primarily done to maintain quality and also to ensure that the customer is satisfied for what the customer is ordered or is paying for in terms of services.
Okay.
Last one that we will look at would be customer loyalty. Now, a lot of all players in the industry primarily look at developing customer loyalty, and the reason why they do that is because they want the same customer to come back to them again and again. So there are lots of loyalty schemes which see, the hotel chains, for example, when you look at the airlines industry, they have air miles and things like that they run. But this is an issue is because the whole idea is that if you get a customer, they want you to retain, they want you to be retained for life or for as long as possible. So customer loyalty in this case is quite important, and that is why it is also considered one of the key contemporary issues within this sector. Now, there are other issues which have compiled, and they are all indirectly related to these 4 issues that we are discussing. And they are also issues within the, which are issues which affect the sector today, which is in present times, and also affect the sector as far as future is concerned. So one of the key issues that we look at, because this is a sector which employs a lot of people, it provides services. Training is one of the key issue on which, there's a lot of money which is being spent and a lot of investment goes in. And this primarily is maintained through the HR function or the, the human resources function within the sector. Customer care is one of the other issues wherein, it is customer care is king. So the customer is king, as they say. And one of the key things which the customers expect, whether they are dining in a restaurant, staying in a hotel, or you making use of one of the the facilities within the hotel, they want to be it is an expectation that they will get the topmost customer care, and that is what defines the service levels within this industry. So there's a lot of money which is spent in customer care within these sectors. So you look at a simple example. When you go into a hotel, you check into a hotel, they always say that, we want to preserve water and, if you can reuse some of your towels and things like that. But that does not mean that you cannot order fresh towels. That does not mean that you can't take a shower or a bath. But what they try to say is, okay, our bit is to ensure that we are being environmentally friendly. We are looking at water conservation, things like that. But at the end of the day, the important part being, if you do order fresh towels, they come to you in the room. If you order something, it still comes over, and that is because the hotels need to maintain the customer care, which is actually promised when you book a hotel or when you book a particular room. Is that okay? And the staff has to be taught and continuously trained to be able to provide this good customer care. Now, there's a lot of stress in this sector. And an example that I would pick up here would be, for chefs. When you are in a kitchen and when you're working and you have so many orders coming through, especially during busy times, there's a lot of stress which a lot of people go through and take when they work within this sector. So this sector, specifically when I look at restaurants, the chefs are pretty much under severe pressure because their job, involves turning around the dishes or whatever is being ordered, on the fly. And sometimes you will see that this creates quality issues. So, for example, if you've ordered some eggs and they have come half fried, or if they've come, over fried, what you have is, as a customer, has the right to say, okay, I don't think this is what I'd ordered. I would want to have a word with the manager, or, could you have these changed, please, or replaced, please. So it creates a bit of a stress for the chef in the background, is because I don't know, in terms of, they might be preparing, 2,000 eggs or omelets or half-boiled eggs or whatever it is, but just a vague example. but it creates a bit of a stress because one, the customer has not been satisfied. Second, the customer asks for a replacement. Third, it has raised a quality issue which has been flagged off with the manager, and then the manager will have a word with the chef. So in some cases, it leads to loss of revenue. In some cases, it leads to a conflict, saying that, no, I prepared it very well, but obviously the person who's taken it out has taken late, and that's why it's become cold or whatever it is. So you see stress getting created because of a lot of issues, and in general, they are related to service or quality issues here. And in general, they relate to operations. Somewhere, somehow, when the service is being provided, if there's a bit of a lag or a delay, it tends to create, quality issues, and those quality issues then lead to conflicts, and conflicts create stress within, the team which is working. So, and then other issues which are basically management and leadership issues. Now, this is a generic point which is true for all the sectors, but when we look at this sector in particular, and if you look at the slide notes which I put in, as per the International Labour Organization, there are about 600,000 employees which leave their job every year, and this leads to a loss of about £1,500 for the training costs for the company. And as a whole, 600,000 employees leave within the UK itself because they're not happy with the managers, or they're not happy with the job that they are doing. This leads to a loss in terms of training costs alone of £886 million. So leadership and management is considered as one of the more important issues within this sector, is because if you have a good leader and a good manager, then they are able to reduce staff turnover or labor turnover in this case. So most hotels, when they look at hiring general managers or people in the senior management position, what they look at is number of years of experience, having worked within all the various departments of the hotel. Have you worked in front office? Have you worked in laundry? Have you worked in night shifts? This, that. I can't remember all the departments, but yeah, the idea is they generally want somebody who's well-oiled, well-experienced with working within all the departments, understands the nuances of working shifts, and also is able to take stress. And that is where they want that person to be recruited. And because the first and one of the most important job roles that the person has and executes is to look at retaining manpower within the hotel. You will see chefs leave the hotel quite frequently. You will see a lot of service staff leaves the hotel quite frequently. You see people in the front desk leave the hotels quite frequently. And his job, or one of the key roles that he plays in his job, is to primarily look at reducing, staff turnover. And this is where, you look at management and leadership also becoming a bit of an issue. And here they want people with the best, experience to come in and, take up that job. And there is a saying which has come across in this industry, which I put up here, which says employees don't leave their jobs, they leave their managers. And this is very true in this particular industry, because if the person who's working with you or dealing with you is not a good manager, what sometimes tends to happen is, even if you love your job, you end up leaving that job is because you do not want to work with that person. You do not want to be able to, you're not able to get along with that person. So this saying has also come across, from this sector or from the services sector in general, which says employees don't leave their jobs, they leave their managers. And this is sometimes down to the leadership style and the abilities which the person has who's actually working in this particular role. Now, very briefly, what I've done in the backup slides is I've put in 2-3 slides primarily related to the technology advancements which are happening in this sector. And this is just to keep you abreast of how technology is going to impact travel, tourism, and hospitality sector in the future. And there are 1 or 2 slides which I put in, and they are primarily for information if you're interested in, doing a bit more reading into, how technological advancement will affect the sector in the future.
Okay.
Is that okay? So any questions on this so far? At your end, Chelsea?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, good stuff. Is everything understood? Was the session okay? My sessions tend to be a bit longer, but I think, the idea is that some of these I don't know in terms of, if we want quicker sessions, do give me that feedback. I can do quick sessions as well, but I think it tend to include a lot of information so that you're able to get most of it from the slides rather than having to read, books or other things, because I kind of go through a couple before I put them together.
Yeah.
The session is fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I like the longer one.
Okay,
Yeah,
no
because
worries.
it gives us a more understanding of the slides as opposed to us going and just reading off our own heads and trying to understand on our own. It's better when you are actually explaining it to us, so it's better for us for writing.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. I've got a lot of travel that I've done in my, in the last 20 years, because I've traveled about 22 countries. I've pretty much been to every corner of the world, and I've experienced a lot of things, in particular. So I've got lots to share, especially when I look at stays, different hotels, loyalty, schemes, and a lot of air mile travel that I've done in my previous jobs. So I hope if it becomes a bit too much, then please let me know, because what I want to be able to do is, as long as you quickly grasp the concept and the key, discussion that we are doing, I think it's important that we move on and, we can concentrate, if you want, more on the assignment activities or on the key concepts. But I'll send you a bit of a handout after this, which will be on the presentation, and I'll upload that as well, and that will give you some reading to do in the impacts of the 3 factors, which primarily are, important for the tasks 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. Sorry.
Okay.
You can bring them and use them to bring them into your assignment, by paraphrasing and using the handout.
Yes.
Okay, good stuff. So I will catch up with you next week, and I'll put this presentation and the handouts on the Moodle pretty much just after this session.
Okay.
Okay, great stuff. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch up with you next week.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.